The poor souls who have to work the night shift can have it rough, as you will soon find out. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This happened to me 2 years ago. It was my first month on the job, and I work night security at this pretty interesting place. For the record, I still work there and have more strange stories that perhaps I'll share in future. I am a 38-year-old male. I've worked security jobs for most of my life, and of course the graveyard shift. I was an event security guard for various well-known concert venues for years, so I've seen my fair share of strange things and crazy people. In other words, I don't scare very easily, and hardly ever go into panic mode when a crisis comes up. The place I currently work is a resort-style apartment complex. To get the layout, there are 3 floors of apartments, with 50 units on each floor. This place takes up 1 city block, with a golf course in the back, indoor swimming pools, hot tubs, and a small movie theatre. You name it, this place has it. Most of the residents are retired doctors, lawyers, and otherwise rich. There are some younger people that live here as well, stockbrokers and real estate agents and so on. Some just use their apartment in the summer and leave as soon as the snow falls. It is located in a well-known tourist town in the United States. The building itself has 12 exits on the first floor. The doors are locked at 11 p.m, but you can exit, but you can't get in unless you go to the front of the building and ask to be buzzed or pick up the phone box next to wherever exit you're at. It will ring and the company cell phone will pick up, with me on the other end, for me to let you in. The front lobby is set up much like a hotel, with sliding glass doors, which I lock when I start my shift. In the middle of the building on the first floor are 2 big slider doors, which I also lock. They lead to the private parking lot. The parking lot itself is gated, and you need a code to get in. It was midsummer, and while it's never really hot here, tonight was an exception. It was still very warm after the sun had set. I came in 10 minutes to 11 in order to start my shift. We have a routine to hand off the keys, event log, and phone to the next person on duty. I am the only security person here at night. My co-worker, who was leaving, told me the side iron gates that lead to the parking lot are open on one side because they were stuck. This is nothing new, and they do often get jammed. She told me the repair people would be in tomorrow sometime to fix them, but just to do some extra patrol outs there tonight. This place sits across the road from a public park, and while the area is pretty decent, the park tends to breed druggies and homeless at night, who sometimes like and try and wander on property or cause trouble. My night started out as uneventful. As a security guard in this place, we only have pepper spray, a large flashlight, keys and a company cell phone to call 911 if need be. We are told not to confront with bodily harm, nor can we detain anyone, We are simply eyes and ears, and to call the police if something does come up. Of course, you can defend yourself if you need to, but in all cases, if you are in danger, call the police. That is our company policy. Basically, I am to walk the grounds and floors for anyone suspicious. Watch the cameras in the security office, which is in the lobby, and otherwise try and stay alert. If a resident calls for maintenance, I would take the information down into the computer for a day shift, or if a resident called with a security issue, I would attend to it. Pretty easy enough job, I thought. I locked the doors of the parking lot and the lobby doors. I did a sweep of all the floors and then found myself back at the desk. It was really quiet, and it rolled around to 3 a.m. I had just sat down to eat my lunch when the company's cell phone rang. The caller ID let me know it was from one of the outside call boxes. I picked it up and said, "Thank you for calling. This is Security Officer James. How may I be of service to you?" All I heard was someone breathing heavy. I glanced at the cameras, and I could see the shadow of a figure standing just out of reach from the door and camera view. All I could see is the open call box and the metal cord from the phone. I ask again, "How may I help?" The man started to breathe heavier and laugh, then silence. It was one of those laughs you hear in a movie when the lunatic is about to do something terrible. I got up from my chair and started to walk out of the office and the door when it rang again. This time it was from call box number 2, which was further down. I quickly looked at the camera and see this large figure in a hooded jacket. I knew this was strange, as it was very warm outside. He was holding a black bag in his hand, but had his back to the camera. "I'm coming for you, and you are going to die." This voice said that in a deep and raspy tone. He hung up before I had the chance to say anything. Then the phone rang again. This time I picked up, and before he could speak, I let him know that the cops were on their way, and to leave the property now as he is on camera. He tried the doors, and both were locked. This time, he was at yet another call box. This guy had to be running at top speed to make it to the next call box, as they are all a good distance between each other. "I can see you. Are you ready to die? The cops won't make it here on time," the guy said. I spoke loudly and pretended like I was talking to another security officer and asked him to send another 3 security guards and such to the location, and that police are dispatched. The guy slammed the phone down loudly against the call box receiver, and I watched him on camera take off into the darkness of the park area. I figured it scared him off. I was going to call the police, but honestly, the location of this place, it would take them at least 15 minutes to get here, and I figured this guy was just some tweaker from the park. I scanned the cameras and walked the back lot just to be sure that no one was there. I had my pepper spray in my hands just in case, but no one was out there. I returned to my desk and wrote down what happened in the incident log. About a half hour passed, and I had finished lunch, and just was about to do the rounds when the phone rang again. This time, it was from an unknown number. I thought it would be a resident calling for a repair issue or something. I picked up and said my normal line, "Where are the cops? I don't see them, but I see you, the guy said. Shit, it was that guy again. I scanned the cameras and did not see anything. I went to the front door to look out, and there was nothing but darkness and a few front floodlights on. I know you're alone, and you're going to die soon, he said. I basically told him to get stuffed and hung up. I called the non-emergency number to 911 and let them know what was going on. The dispatcher said she would send out a car to check the area and to make contact with me. Next thing I hear is a loud thud against the glass window to the day manager's office, which sits across from the security room. Another 3 loud bangs. I run to the door and unlock it. I pull up the shades and shine my flashlights through the window into the darkness. And I catch the face of this hooded man. He looked to be about 40, with long, stringy hair poking down, and these wild eyes. He looked right at me and grinned before slamming his head into the window and tried to break it. I started yelling at him and told him the cops are coming and to get the hell out of here. That's when he pulled the biggest damn butcher's knife I've ever seen and made a slicing motion, like he would use it to cut my throat. This guy must be crazy and was more than likely on some drugs. He continued slamming his body against the glass, trying to break it. He used his head to try and break the window, but managed to bust his head open, so the window now had his blood all over it. I backed out of the office and locked the door to it. I then decided to wait for the cops, as this guy was out of control, and my pepper spray wasn't going to stop him, and the last thing I wanted was to handle a bloody crazy person. He then ran to the nearest side door and took the call box phone off the hook. He then ran to each call box and removed all the phones, which caused my company cell phone to ring and jam up the line. This guy had to be on meth or something, because he's ran as fast as I could imagine. I watched the camera and noticed to my horror the sliding door to the garage was now open. Now it was common for residents to go out to their cars and unlock the door themselves. It's just a sliding lock, like the kind in department stores. But this is the last thing I need, with this nut job running around. I sprinted across the building and took a shortcut through a couple of banquet rooms to make it into the garage. As I was doing so, I saw that crazy guy running up the garage pathway. I slid that door as fast as I could and locked it before he got to the entryway. He then slammed his body into the glass, over and over, but the door did not move. I locked the second set of doors in case he got through the outside ones. He would at least be trapped or slow him down. I reached for my pepper spray, thinking maybe he would just leave, and yelled the cops are here. He started to laugh and howl, and then held the knife up against him before running into the darkness of the parking garages. I called the cops on my personal cell phone to let them know that the man had a knife. The dispatcher told me the cops would be there shortly, and I let her know what had happened. I made my way to the front again and locked myself in the security office. At least this place had no windows, and I could watch on camera. I heard another loud thud and a bang and realized he was at the front lobby doors trying to get in. I was hoping the cops would roll up any minute, but they didn't, and while it probably didn't take them that long, it felt like forever at this point. The guy was standing at the lobby doors with the knife in hand. He faced the camera, and by this time his hoodie had fallen back. He was bald-headed, with wild, long, stringy, crazy hair on the sides of his head. His eyes were huge, and I will never forget that grin on his face as he mouthed to the camera, "Die, die," while making stabbing motions with the knife, blood running across his face from slamming into the glass. And then he ran into the darkness. About 5 minutes later, the cops show up. They sent one officer. He asked me what the guy looked like, and I told him. I have camera footage. He drove through the area at first and shined a spotlight. The cop returned to tell me he couldn't find anyone, and he had driven around the entire block and the area behind the golf course. I showed him the footage and printed out a picture from the camera. The cop said he didn't see any signs of the guy and that he would patrol the area and to call back if he came again. It was now nearly 5 a.m. when the cop left. I waited until 6 when it was daylight and people were starting to get out and about before I walked around and hung up all the phones from the call boxes. The guy literally took all 12 phones off the hook. When my manager came in during the morning shift at 8 a.m, I told her what happened, and she said they would keep an eye out and have a meeting to let everyone who worked there know and be aware. They had an extra security guard on my shift for 2 weeks after, but the guy never returned. The cops never found the guy or who he was. So crazy bloody guy with the knife. Let's not meet again. I worked overnight at McDump's because it was generally quiet and the pay was good. The restaurant was open 24 hours, both drive-through and the indoor seating area. There was a gas station at the far end of the building, with only one employee working overnight. We were out in the middle of nowhere, about 10 minutes from the nearest town, which had a population of about 450 people. Highway patrol didn't even bother patrolling the roads out where we were. It was so far out. The one time we had an injury bad enough to call an ambulance, it took them 35 minutes to reach us. You know, people die in that time. So, not the best place to be working the graveyard shift. Towards the end of my employment there, we had many employees quit, and most of them were our overnight team. At one point, we were down to myself and 3 managers who work rotating shifts to cover the overnight, with only 2 people working overnight at any given time, plus the 1 employee over at BP, meaning 3 people in this building. I generally worked as front counter, food prep, and cleaning whilst my manager did paperwork, and God only knows what the poor lonely soul at BP got up to. One night, creep number 1 comes in and looks at the newspaper at BP, but doesn't purchase one. He comes over to the seating area, sits down, and just sits there. 15 minutes later, I ask if he's alright and if he needs any help. He responds, "I'm just enjoying the view," which is really strange considering it's almost 2 a.m. and raining outside, and you can't see anything from where he's sitting, except the front counter, McCafe, and the fryers. An hour later, he's still sitting there. I've almost forgotten about him. He's just sitting quietly staring. My manager comes up and tells me he's going out through the back door to have a quick smoke with the girl from BP. Cool, no problems. Happens all the time. As soon as they walk through the kitchen, the man stands up and orders a slice of toasted banana bread and starts up some small talk. Have you been here long tonight? Uh-huh, since 9. When's your shift finish? Around 7. Why? Oh, they work you really hard, don't they? Yep. Is someone else coming to help out? In a couple of hours, I guess. This is the point where I start really panicking. People seem to think talking about long hours on overnights is new and inventive small talk. We get it all the time. But when he asks, "Do you have a security guard?" I started to panic. Yeah, he does another location down the road and comes around occasionally. Lie. Which the guy would know is a lie because he'd been sitting there for over an hour. The guy starts to walk behind the counter of the cafe as I'm making his banana bread, and I'm full of panic. As our cafe is the only one right next to the entrance and exit, and he's blocking it. And there's nobody but me in the building currently. The cash register isn't even in the area, so I've got no idea what he wants. It's only you and the manager working here tonight, isn't it? Nope, there's a cleaner in the back. He's cleaning the freezer tonight. That was a lie as well. What nights are you working this week? I've got the rest of the week off, sorry. Also a lie. At this point, my manager walks back in and we can hear him laughing with the girl from BP. But not see them, and they can't see us. The creepy dude hightails it out of there, leaving behind his toasted banana bread and coffee, and wasn't seen again that night. A couple of weeks later, he comes back with 2 other shady looking guys. They all order food. My manager is in the back doing paperwork as usual. They pay for their food, and I let them know how long it's going to be, ask them to take a seat, and go to start cooking it. Next thing I know, one of them is behind the counter, just having a look around. I let him know he's not supposed to be there, and he nonchalantly walks back. So I do the only sensible thing and alert the manager, while I'm cooking the food. He gets the same grilling that I got, but now with things like how much money the store makes thrown in. One of the guys knocks over a mop bucket, and my manager starts to clean it up. Just in time for one of the other guys to walk into the kitchen again. I calmly tell him to leave, and he walks through the kitchen to the employee-only door, and the 3 of them leave, without their food, without another word. I don't even know how he knew the employee-only door was there. A few days later, shady guy number 2 comes back, steals a muffin, and walks out. About a week after that, shady guy number 3 comes through tripping on drugs and makes a scene about not receiving tomato slices on his burger, which wasn't supposed to have tomato slices in it anyway. So we give him some tomato slices to shut him up and kick him out. Now the entire time these adventures have been going on, our managers have been saying, "It's alright, they're just weird. They're not actually going to try anything, you're just being paranoid." Cue another couple of weeks of them coming in at random times of the night, sometimes sitting around for an hour not doing anything, sometimes asking questions, but almost always ordering food and leaving without it, when the manager comes around. And then I ran into creep number 1 at the mall where I live, 45 minutes from the restaurant. He strikes up a conversation with me. I panicked and ran for security, called my husband and sat there until he came to pick me up. Security never found the guy I was talking about, as an Asian man in his 30s in a black hoodie and black jeans, average weight and about 5'7", is apparently really common in a crowded mall. Not surprising really. I quit the job about a week later, and I lodged a formal complaint with the restaurant on other grievances. But I let it slip about the creep to my manager, and he full on freaked out, yelled at our managers, and kinda went nuts that nobody said anything about him. I ran into creep number 1 at the mall one more time, but this time my husband was with me. He started to approach us, But I told my husband who the guy was, and next thing I know, my husband is between the guy and myself, staring this guy down, his phone in hand calling the police. The guy walks by us, bumped my husband's shoulder, and we haven't seen him since. And the store manager from McDump's still thinks I'm paranoid. I am so glad I quit. I work in retail, and I have a very unique name. This happened a few years ago, when I first started. I work at a 24-hour convenience store, and at this point, I was working the graveyard shift. I'm used to all types of unsavory folk, but there was this one guy who left me particularly unsettled. It was about 3 a.m., and unfortunately, I was working alone because my coworker decided to call out last minute. The store was dead, and I was packing out a delivery when he walked in. He was a short, stocky guy, a little older than me, probably in his 20s or early 30s. I looked up from the task at hand and greeted him with a friendly smile, and asked him if he needed help with anything. He grinned, looked me up and down with his brown eyes darkening with lust. Yes. Do you sell condoms? I nodded and pointed him to the health and beauty section and proceeded to the registry in order to cash him out. He browses for a little, and typically he picked up a box of Magnums and those herbal sexual supplement pills. So how are you doing tonight? He inquired. I told him I was fine, working hard, and anxious to go home. His eyes travelled up and down my body, his eyes settling on my name tag, which is pinned just beneath my left breast. I felt a little uncomfortable. I've never been comfortable with people staring at me, and his eyes lingered longer than necessary. He asked how to pronounce my name. I tell him, and he says it's a nice name politely. I thank him and begin to scan and bag his items, trying to avoid eye contact. He asks if I have a boyfriend, and truthfully, I say yes. He comments that he must be a lucky man, and he wishes he could be in his shoes. Again, I smile uncomfortably, and, as we're supposed to do, ask if he needs anything else. Not unless I can have you, he drawled lazily. Now I'm getting annoyed. I ignore his comment and proceed to tell him his total. He swipes his card, and I complete the transaction and tell him to have a good night. He thanked me and then asks if I'm working by myself. No, my coworker is downstairs doing some paperwork. I lied. Now he grins. No, he isn't. I've been watching you since 12. I haven't seen another person in here at this time. Are you afraid? I frowned. You've been watching me? That's not creepy at all. I tell him that he needs to leave, if he's done shopping. Then I have work to complete. Once again he laughs at me. I thought he was going to argue, but a group of drunken guys walks in and he leaves. Later that night, I check my Facebook and see I have a Facebook request. Guess who it was from? Again, I have a unique name. Only 2 people on Facebook have it. I block him and delete the request. Next morning, I'm going to the subway station. The wanted poster on the token booth catches my eye. The face is familiar. It was the creep from my store. Wanted for sexual assault and battery on East 96th Street. The incident happened more than a month ago, and I hurriedly told my manager, who called the police and gave him our tip. I don't know if he was ever caught, but please, let's not meet outside my store. And I still don't feel comfortable with any name tags. Living in an area like Portland, Oregon, you learn to expect a certain amount of weirdness taking public transit. Being a woman living in any major city, you expect it. At one point, more likely in your life, you of course expect to encounter perverts or creeps. It goes with the territory, even if it shouldn't happen at all. This encounter happened a few years ago, but I still remember it. It changed my behavior when wandering alone at night, which is significant for me, since I am an introverted night owl who prefers graveyard shift and shopping at 24-hour stores. In 2008, I was working at a call center, and my shift at the time had me clocking in at 7 and leaving at 4 a.m. Most nights, I would leave with a couple of friendly co-workers, and we would wait for the Blue Line train to roll through, usually only a 10-minute wait on weekdays. At that point, all but one would part ways with me. Most of my co-workers lived closer to Gresham, and at the time, I lived in Hillsborough. We were pretty good acquaintances by proxy of being on the same team and taking the same train, but not quite friends. She lived further down than I did, so she usually sat with me until I got off. It was sometime in July, I forget the specific day, but it was hot enough, even after dark, that I opted to go to work in a spaghetti strap top and shorts rather than my usual t-shirt and jeans. The call center was casual dress, doubly for graveyard shift, since our manager didn't care what we did so long as it didn't get back up to upper management or HR. That night, I was alone for the walk to the max, since half of my team had called in, my train buddy included. I didn't think much of it, aside from being pissed off and exhausted from the extra workload. I suspected they all bailed to attend a party a co-worker had advertised the week before. When my train came by, I honed in on a deserted section and claimed a forward-facing seat by the operator terminal, intent on ignoring the world and catnapping my way home. Someone getting on with a bike joined me out of my daze because of the obnoxious clatter they made when people positioned them on the wall hooks. Apparently, scowling is considered a form of flirtation because the bike owner made eye contact. He smirked and sauntered his way over to take a seat right across from me. Irritated because the car was deserted aside from two people on the opposite end, I ignored him and stared out of the window, longingly waiting for my stop. After a few minutes of being ignored, he leaned across the aisle in order to get my attention. "Hey, good morning. You work around here?" Polite enough, but I grunted non-committally in return, not in the mood for small talk. This, however, only seemed to encourage him. After a brief pause, he tried again less subtly. "You're pretty." It's not the first time I've had people hit on me, but generally, when I put on my bitch face, they leave me alone. So it made my skin crawl uncomfortably to have it ignored. My disdained frown didn't seem to register, as he took my silence as an invitation to slip over to the seat directly beside me. blocking me in. This sent up red flags and wailing sirens in my head, even aside from the very obvious way he leaned in and peered, clearly trying to see down my shirt. I finally found my voice, leaning away. I am not interested. Any normal human being at that point would have realized they were being creepy, apologize, and move seats. Not this guy. This guy smiled, reached into a pocket, and pulled out his phone. I was prepared to physically kick him out of the seat if he pointed the camera at me. So, I was dumbstruck for a minute when he calmly asked, "What's your number, sweetie?" It was as if he wasn't registering my reactions as unusual. Before I could think to respond, he glanced at me expectantly. "By the way, where's your friend tonight?" My blood ran cold, and I felt a little panicked, and realizing he'd clearly watched me on previous nights. But I didn't recognize him, as I had come to recognize other regulars on the morning trains. Seeing a stop come up, I stood abruptly. "This is my stop." That finally made him frown, but he switched back to his original seat without comment. At having me loom over him, I am 5'7" without heels. The second thing was there wasn't enough room to move without touching him. I made a beeline for the nearest door, not caring that it was still a good 3 stops from where I needed to be. I was in such a rush to get away from the uncomfortable situation that I didn't register the sound of someone taking a bike off a rack. I intended to just wait for the next train, but as I was walking towards the kiosk to look at the schedule, I finally noticed the clicking sound of the bike gears behind me. Too afraid to draw attention to the fact I'd been lying about my stop, I stared straight ahead and kept walking to the platform. It was deserted, as I knew it would be for a while before the next train came by in either direction. This stop was one that I wasn't familiar with, but I recalled that not far from the shopping centre and a few apartment complexes, I walked purposefully and tried to pretend like I hadn't noticed that I was being followed. Since he made no more advances, I got the sick feeling that he intended to follow me home. I stuffed my hands into my pockets to feel for my phone and a small pocket knife I kept out of paranoia for just such a situation. I considered calling 911, but since nothing physical had happened yet, I knew they wouldn't take it seriously, and I didn't want to provoke him with such an obvious gesture. The walk seemed to take forever though. I knew the shopping centre was only a quarter of a mile from the stop. The stores and parking lots were deserted, but it was situated on the corner of a busy intersection, and a little further down, I could see a lit gas station sign. So I walked a bit faster. I must have looked as freaked out as I felt, because when the attendant spotted me through the front window, he came out from behind the counter. When I walked in, he was looking past me. "Friend of yours?" I shook my head emphatically and explained that the man had been following me from the train. The attendant nodded in understanding, discreetly going back behind the counter and picking up the phone whilst I made my way to the back of the store, staying close to an employee-only door by the coolers. I pretended to browse the aisles as I listened to the attendant talk to who I could only assume was his manager, finally turning around to see just where the creep was. My stomach dropped. He was standing just outside the window, smiling, staring straight at me. He made no move to follow me inside, but he looked prepared to wait, more than a little scared. I made my way to the counter. The attendant looked annoyed as he hung up the phone. My manager is on the way. There's not much I can do until then, since he hasn't done anything. You can stay here, and if he comes in I can ask him to leave. It should get busier soon. He offered the last feebly, unsettled as well. Throughout the wait, the man didn't budge. He stood there smiling and blinking. It was a tense few minutes until a car finally pulled up. A heavy-set older Latino man jumped out. He paused for a moment to assess the situation before approaching the creep. I couldn't hear exactly what he said, but it sounded like the manager was pissed, and the smile finally vanished. I thought I was going to be sick from relief after a few brief moments, as the man hopped back on his bike and pedaled away. Shaking a little as the adrenaline started to wear off, I thanked them both and explained what had happened on the train. The manager offered to drive me home, but stranger danger on high alert, I declined. I did accept an offer to walk me back to the MAX station, and he waited with me, keeping an eye on the platform until the next train came. I made it home without further incident, but I was jumpy and paranoid at passing bikes for a good long while afterwards. I stopped going out at night and instead tolerated sleep deprivation on my weekends to shop during the day. After my train buddy heard what happened, we exchanged numbers and we let each other know when we'd been calling in sick. I never quite felt secure in my home or at work after that, just wondering how long that creep had been watching me and my co-worker without us noticing. I declined to renew my lease when it came due and had a co-worker with a car help me move. Shortly after that, I quit work and found a new job on a bus line. So, creepy, eco-conscious Max Line stalker, let's not meet again, because I bought a taser. This creepy incident I endured some years ago. I am a 41-year-old male, but the following events happened to me in 1999, when I was 24 years old. It's important to mention that I had an average build and was never a tough guy. I was working the graveyard shift at a motel in Oregon. My job title was night auditor, as I was expected to compare the daily revenue with the figures in the computer. Occasionally, someone would check in or out, but for the most part, I hardly saw a soul on my shift. My only other duty was to walk around the property every few hours to make sure there was nothing unusual going on. Checking the darkened property at night was always a bit creepy. The motel had a lot of rooms, and the larger parking lot offered a great many hiding spots for anyone who might be lurking. In my first few months, I had to chase off the occasional bum off the property or out the lobby, as they always wanted shelter and free coffee. But my typical night was extremely uneventful. Nonetheless, I was nervous about being antagonized by violent prone weirdos, so I bought a big can of pepper spray and a mag light. One night at 3 a.m, I stepped outside to check the property. It was midwinter and very cold, so I wore my coat. On the opposite side of the parking lot, a large man in a green t-shirt and jeans was marching purposefully towards one of the buildings. I thought it was odd that he'd be outside in just a t-shirt, since it was so cold that my face was stinging. He marched to a motel door room and tried to open it, finding it locked. I watched him intently. He marched to the next door and tried to open it, then the next one. "Excuse me," I said, somewhat loudly. The man stopped, facing away from me, his hands still gripping the door handle. I walked towards him, gripping my Maglite and pepper spray tightly. It was obvious to me this guy was up to no good. "May I help you, sir?" The guy turned around and faced me. He was nearly 6.5 feet tall, looked muscular beneath a thick layer of body fat, had big, curly dark hair, with a thick handlebar moustache, and worst of all, was covered in blood. It was all over his face and the entire front of his shirt. Even his jeans were wet with blood all around the waist, groin and hip, and his pant legs were streaked with blood right down to the cuffs. Worst yet, he looked at me with a crazed expression. His eyes widened with irrational rage as his teeth clenched and fully exposed. He looked like a 40-ish escaped con auditioning for the role of Carey. The sight of this gore-soaked freak made me forget to breathe. He walked towards me with quick long strides that prompted me to click my Maglite and shine it on him. The light reflected brightly off his face, informing me the blood was fresh. He was undaunted by the flashlight and maintained his course. "Sir," I said, "are you a guest at the motel?" He continued forward. The closer he came, the clearer I could hear this maniac's breath, which contained a growl with each exhalation. I felt it was obvious he was going to attack. "I have pepper spray and I'm ready to use it," I said. His growling became more vocal, and he seemed to hasten his step. At this point, he was about 20 feet away from me. A quick side note about the pepper spray. I bought that particular can because the label claimed it would actually fire a steam, accurately up to 15 feet. The blood-covered man raised his gnarled, bloody hands towards me, as though he intended to claw my face apart. I pressed the button on my pepper spray can, aiming high so that it would hit his face. The stream was powerful, and even had a bit of recoil that kicked my hand back. The beam from my Maglite was also aimed at his face, so I could see the stream of liquid blast him directly in the eyes. It was so forceful that much of the blood in his face instantly washed away. His eyes and mouth snapped shut a moment before he stopped and did a clumsily half pirouette away from me. I stopped spraying at him. He emitted a long, loud shriek of rage-laden anguish and raised his hands to his face. "I'm going to call the police," I said. I announced that in case he intended to resume his approach once his pain had subsided. "Don't think this is over," he growled. He turned and faced me with one eye partially open and a large glob of mucus hanging from his nostrils. "You are a dead man," he hissed. He faced the exit of the parking lot and staggered towards it. I rushed to the lobby, locked the big glass doors and called 911. They told me they'd send officers to make a report. The cops arrived minutes later and took my statement. They were partially interested when I told him the man was covered in blood, and he said they'd be in touch later if someone turned up. Thankfully, I never heard from them. I don't know if the blood on the whack job was the result of an injury he'd sustained, or if he'd hurt somebody, and I couldn't say if he was legitimately insane, or if he was out his mind on hard drugs. All I know is that he was too out of sorts to wash or even wipe the blood from his face, so I shudder to imagine what he would have done if an occupied room had been accessible to him, or if he'd managed to get his big bloody hands on me. Yikes, I say. And to lighten the mood to finish off with these stories today, here is the bonus that you were promised. My roommate is working her first overnight shift at some popular burrito place from 11 PM to 4 AM in the entertainment district part of the city. Basically, an area full of strip clubs, bars, clubs, and rowdy douche nozzles, and meth heads. We get lots of those here too. So you can probably imagine the agonizing evil that awaits to be bestowed upon this innocent little burrito goddess. Needless to say, this 5'0" microscopic Asian girl was scared out of her mind. Being the heroic, almighty guardian defender for miniature Asian girls like myself, I gave her my dog spray, as pepper spray is illegal where I'm from. Since Burrito Goddess didn't know how to use it, I decided to elegantly demonstrate by spraying the gassy liquid like hell through an open window, figuring it would work flawlessly. As the butt of my index finger released the pressure from the button, I heard a soft whisper above from the heavens. 'Twas at that moment when God himself whispered, "Now is time you pay for all your sins, you filthy wretch." Before I could even think about running away to escape the calamity that would soon follow, a gush of wind, with the force of a quintillion oxen, blew back my way, causing a mist of spicy hell to enter my delicate lungs. Burrito Goddess watched in horror, as from afar I felt the wrath of 1,000 suns baked in chili peppers beyond the Scoville scale, while desperately gasping for air and wheezing to violent degrees. I found out that despite popular belief, Google doesn't have answers to everything, like how to relieve yourself after inhaling dog spray, for example. But hey, will she be safe during her night shift tonight? Absolutely. Did I once again fulfill my duties as the heroine and saviour of puny Asian girls everywhere? Indubitably. Have my lungs yet recovered from the lethal misty breath of Satan? Nay. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. That bonus story did make me chuckle. I don't even want to begin to imagine how horrible it must have been to be on the receiving end of that dog spray. Ugh. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to give it a big thumbs up, and consider subscribing and hit the little bell icon for even more stories every day. Don't forget that if you would like me to read your story on my channel, you can send it to my email or share it to my Reddit, which is of course available in the description. I don't guarantee that I'll read it, but if you include a lot of description, punctuation and paragraphing, there's a good chance it will be read. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.